This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, have we grown numb to censorship? The latest headlines tell a shocking story. We talked to Gen Z superstar Isabel Brown about her new book, The End of the Alphabet, and why everything you know or think you know about Gen Z just might be wrong. And we share what might be the biggest lesson of Oscar night, really. Before we kick off the show, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. We've got new episodes every Wednesday, plus bonus episodes. And again, video is coming very soon. Trust me, I am working on this. It is coming soon, very soon. And if you like what you hear, could you give us a review over at iTunes? Every kind word, every syllable, it helps. Thanks.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
One of my favorite journalistic expressions these days goes back a long time. I think give or take 100 years. It's a dog bites man story. Or the flip side, it's a man bites dog story. The old journalism saw comes up a lot lately. Think about Robert De Niro, the great actor and Trump and raging Trumpaholic, yells about hating a certain ex-president all the time. And that really is a dog bites man story. He just does it constantly, 24/7. And yet, of course, the media covers it like it's breaking news. Yet, if an actress shreds cancel culture, like Taraji P. Henson just did recently, well, that's a man bites dog situation. It's rare. It's more newsworthy. You know, lately there have been so many cases of censorship that I think they're threatening to become a dog bites man story. And that is not good. Jewish rapper Matisyahu has been canceled not once, not twice, but 3 times in recent weeks. His crime? Well, he's Jewish, and he's a supporter of Israel. Comedian Kayvon saw his gig at UConn get canceled too, at practically the last minute, because, well, he's a conservative. Does it matter that his act is squeaky clean? Apparently not. Actor Brett Gelman of Stranger Things fame has a new book out, and he's been trying to promote it at different bookstore appearances. Well, multiple appearances have been canceled, again, because he's Jewish and he supports Israel. And 4 unwoke comedians have found their bookings at a Seattle comedy club. They got canceled. Well, why? Well, because they're 4 unwoke comedians. It's as simple as that. There's more examples of this, but you get the point. This is all recent information. And the media is mostly yawning about this. Now, some sites have covered it. That's true. Not a lot of them, but some. But the major news outlets have been mostly looking the other way. And this is the one that I find surprising and a bit sad. A lot of conservative sites have done the same. I mean, they, of all people, should be all over these stories. They do care about free speech far more than the mainstream media. Absolutely. But what's even worse, I think, is that few of these outlets, even when they're covering them, they're not connecting the dots. Why is this happening? Why aren't more artists speaking out about the problem? Does anyone think this won't get worse? And more importantly of everything here, where is the public outrage? I truly fear we're becoming numb to censorship, and that might be the worst news of all. Here's your movie trivia question of the week. The great Zomcom Shaun of the Dead turns 20 this year. We're all getting old. Of course, the film stars Simon Pegg and Nick Frost as slackers who are fighting off a zombie invasion. And they ward off a whole gaggle of undead early in the film by throwing something unconventional at the undead. This isn't a spear. This isn't an axe. This isn't a weapon. This is something a bit different. It doesn't really have great results either, but they are trying. So what are they throwing at the undead creatures? The answer? At the end of the show. You know, I'm raising 2 Gen Zers, but I'm still pretty confused about their demographic. So I turned to an expert to teach me a thing or two about them. Isabel Brown is a 23-year-old influencer, pundit, and streamer. She appears across the media landscape. She shares her wit and wisdom on all things Gen Z, and of course our media age. She's really well versed in that as well. Long story short, she's one smart cookie, as my mom might say. She's also the author of a new book. It's called The End of the Alphabet: How Gen Z Can Save America. The book explodes a lot of myths about Gen Z, and it shows how this generation hates cancel culture, craves authenticity, and could be exactly what we need in these troubled times. Oh, I certainly hope so. Isabel shares much more about it in her deep dive conversation that touches on the culture, movies, and, of course, TikTok. Isabel, you've written a definitive look at Gen Z, so I want to start with a really basic question. And you explore this in the book, but I want people to realize it or get a grasp of it. What is the biggest thing we get wrong when we talk about Gen Z? I feel like there's all these different perceptions and labels, but this is who you are. This is your culture. You know this better than most people. What are we getting wrong?
Oh my gosh, if that isn't the biggest question that we could have possibly started with. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me
Sure.
and just facilitating this conversation, because you hit the nail right on the head there at the beginning of this entire dialogue. Gen Z is wildly misunderstood today. And I've been working in the realm of politics and content creation for the last 5 years or so, really highlighted as somewhat of a token voice for our generation, for those older than us. And part of the reason I even wrote this book to begin with was stemming from frustration that so many intelligent, very, very passionate people have labeled Gen Z as hopeless, as stupid, as uneducated, as crybaby entitled socialists with no hope for contributing anything positive to American culture, politics, and society. And the truth is, Gen Z does not fit the bill that the image so many people on television and radio and podcasting and more are trying to get us to buy into. So I think the biggest misconception really is that most people don't know Gen Z, culturally at least, is the most conservative generation America has seen since World War II. We are not these wildly unilateral leftists that are trying to destroy the hallmarks of American civilization. We're really fighting like hell against a very backwards, upside down society to bring reality back into the fold moving forward.
You know, one of the things you bring about in the book is authenticity, that Gen Z really is just had enough with commentary. It could be political, it could be related to pop culture, that just feels wrong. It feels canned. It feels forced. Can you share maybe a pop culture example or two where they're getting it right? And I often think about late night TV. It just seems so pre-planned, pre-packaged, phony, ha, ha, ha. Oh, tell me this anecdote that we spoke about, 10 minutes ago behind the scenes. Who's doing it right, you think?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. You're right about late night television there, that it does feel so scripted and this inauthentic, completely false, glossy, edited version of what humor is supposed to be. I write about humor quite a bit in the book because I think humor has been used as a fascinating tool for our generation to realize that A, we don't have to take life so seriously, and B, it's okay to laugh again. I think so many people, even in comedy and entertainment and Hollywood, have really taken away our ability to be lighthearted and joyful over the last several years, particularly in the last decade, because everything has to be wary about being offensive. Everything is up for cancellation. Everything has to be so serious. And what I love about social media in particular is it's given rise to a whole new generation of voices reminding us it's okay to not take everything so seriously. So I think of people like Theo Vaughn, Shane Gillis, John Crist even, who really got their start as comedians trying to make it the old way, but blew up to reach millions of people every day, making silly TikTok sketches or YouTube videos, and now are some of the biggest voices in the space.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, when I was reading your book, this jumped out at me, and I think it's a good segue here, is that my son is 15, and his sense of humor is irreverent. It could be a little dark at times. It could be silly. And it sounds like his friends have a similar mindset. And I thought, well, aren't these young people, aren't they supposed to be, cautious with the jokes they tell? And what your research has uncovered is just the opposite. Talk a little bit about that and how Gen Z approaches comedy, kind of expanding on what you just said before. But I'm seeing it in real time with my kid, but you're living this world. Dig deeper into this. Why aren't they offended?
You are maybe the 30th or 40th parent that has told me this in the last couple of weeks, that their teenager has this edgy, dark sense of humor and they think, oh my gosh, did you really just laugh at that? That's crazy. But I think there's so much to be unpacked there about this cultural moment that for so long, American culture and comedy in particular has been so stifled by people in positions of power because it has to be scripted. It has to be politically correct. It has to follow all of the rules of the woke authoritarian mob trying to get us to think in lockstep ideology, that we're so sick and tired of that. And it echoes beyond comedy as well into every other aspect of American culture. I always like to remind people the idea of Gen Z being this rebellious countercultural generation is not new. In fact, this has been repeated throughout all of human history, that every cohort of young people wants to do exactly the same thing, and that is to rebel against the people who came before us.
Mhm.
You're a parent of a 15-year-old, so I'm sure you have intimate experience with your 15-year-old saying, Dad, you know nothing about me,
That's
and wanting to
never
do his
happened, I
own
swear.
thing.
Never,
Never,
never.
never.
Yeah.
But this is what happens at the societal level too. Back in several decades past of American history, to be punk rock and countercultural and stick it to the man meant to cover your body in tattoos and have spiky hair and join a punk rock band. But amazingly, today in the 2020s, to be countercultural, to be punk rock, to stick it to the people in power is to embrace traditionally conservative with a lowercase c cultural values, to laugh at things that are a little edgier and to embrace some dark humor, but also to want to get married in a culture that's trying to destroy marriage, to reject the idea of what now I like to call the leftist arts educational degrees rather than liberal arts on college campuses, that you need a degree in something like, I don't know, underwater lesbian dance theory in order to be successful, that you can't start your own business. 62% of us have already started our own businesses. We're deleting our dating apps. We're throwing away our birth control. So even outside of the world of comedy, we're rebelling against what society has presented to us on a silver platter, all caked in leftism, as this perfect utopian, a perfect society. But I think we're trying to redefine good nostalgic chapters of our past with a new age way to bring these ideas into the future, and comedy is no exception.
I've often thought that if this show is a right-leaning show, your thinking is right-leaning. I'm sure that not doctrinaire, but that's kind of where you fall. I always thought this is like an opportunity for people on the right to really lean into humor and comedy and edginess and pushing past the woke handcuffs. I just think there's a cultural benefit there that conservative can be seen as stiff and square. And I think, if we kind of go in this direction while the Stephen Colberts of the world are telling us not to joke about X and Y, and if we do, that there could be a cultural benefit to that. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. And I think you're seeing that in real time. Obviously, you've seen that with people like Shane Gillis and Theo Vaughn and people who have been a little politically edgier and towards the right over the last several years. But for gosh sakes, even look at former President Donald Trump. I mean, the man loves to laugh.
Mhm.
And no matter what you think about his policies, he has some unbelievably hilarious internet related content that has won over the hearts of so many young people because it's a joke that we were all thinking, but very few people were willing to make in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's funnier than half the stand-up comedians out there. I mean, he has that brand, that voice, that sense of humor that is very appealing. When you write a book like this, like I wrote a book about woke Hollywood, and I feel like when you deep dive into a subject, even though you know it well, you live it, you learn something. The whole exploration process, the writing process, the putting your thoughts down on paper, editing it, opens up new things. You see things in a different way. Did you find that with the End of the Alphabet, where even though you know this content well, just doing that deep dive exposed you to new thoughts, or maybe had you connect some dots you weren't connecting before?
I did. And, it's funny you ask it that way. I've really had to defend against this idea that women are overwhelmingly leftist, young women in particular, for a while. And I knew anecdotally that I was not seeing what the data is telling us, at least politically and culturally, for a while. But right smack dab in the middle of researching for this book and starting to write it, I had the opportunity to be on the very viral, controversial Whatever podcast.
Mhm.
If you've ever seen any clips of that on the internet, typically it involves a roundtable of a handful of pretty conservative people. Candace Owens has been on, Michael Knowles has made a few appearances, and a lot of very, very leftist women who typically are OnlyFans creators. They might work in the adult film industry, people who clash up against each other. And so when I got the invite to appear and talk about dating and the fact that I had just gotten engaged, I was really nervous because I knew that it would probably lend to some very viral moments on social media, but it would probably be a pretty uncomfortable conversation for the few hours that we all sat down. And this would have been about a year ago right now that we filmed this. But it was fascinating to sit down across the table with 8 or 9 other women who, when we were standing outside, were really nervous to talk to each other. But the minute the dialogue opened, I realized that even though we had nothing in common in terms of our lifestyles and our choices up to that point, all of these women were feeling exactly the same way from the lies in culture. Even though they probably voted very differently from me on a data survey, they probably would answer questions very differently from me. When we went around the table, every single one of them said that they had thrown away their birth control that year because they were tired of feeling like crap all the time,
Mhm.
that they felt like hookup culture had lied to them about what was going to make them happy in their personal relationships, and they were really looking for something more. Or even that modern feminism had been like a lie to them, and that they really did want real connection with young men in their lives. They didn't think they needed to sacrifice their relationships for their careers. And it was such a hallmark, eye opening moment for me because I realized data and statistics and surveys can really only go so far to capture the heart and soul of a generation. And when we hear lies like, 90% of young women are extremely leftist, that makes people in politics so angry. And it fuels a lot of this manufactured outrage industrial complex that we see on cable news and in radio and in podcasting, but it doesn't capture the heart and soul of culturally where we are right now in America. And I think, really, culturally speaking, Generation Z has felt very broken as the oldest of us have come into adulthood. We're being told that this is the greatest time in world history, that we have more opportunities and more rights and more privileges than any other time in society. But we're miserable. And if you really break down the numbers, you look at a society where, let's look at young women, for example, in 2021, 1 in 3 teenage girls in America seriously contemplated taking her own life.
It's
That's
shocking. It's shocking.
It's a solemn reality, but it's also a place where we can go forward and we
Mhm.
can realize the lies and the packaged reality that the people in positions of power are trying to sell to us is empty. There's no meaning there. There's no greater purpose there. And we want something more that we're willing to now go out and fight for on offense.
It's heartening to hear your story about how two different groups, as it were, once you get them in a room, they have more in common than you think. They can talk, they can have an exchange of ideas, they don't have to hate each other. Part of your book talked about something that you lost some friends along the way, just for being a little bit more vocal about your beliefs. I lost my best friend a couple of years ago. We were having a politically adjacent discussion / argument. It was getting a little bit heated, and he hung up on me. We haven't spoken since. And I just want to, I don't know whether you can share a little bit of what you went through, or conversely, how do we avoid that? I mean, I don't think you're the person who's stopping these friendships. I suspect it's the other people, but just generally speaking, how do we navigate that? Because it's a terrible thing. I mean, listen, my wife is liberal and I'm conservative, and we've been married nearly 20 years now. And we're delicate when we talk about the issue, but it's not stopping us. It shouldn't stop us because our other values are in line. How do we dance around this issue? It seems like it's much worse today than ever before.
You're right. It shouldn't stop us. And, it's funny. Some of my dearest friendships that have grown over the last several years have been with people who vehemently disagree with me on everything. But some of my longest friendships have fallen apart, just like yours, because of being more outspoken about my beliefs. And what's really sad is this has become somewhat of a universal experience in America today. I think if you ask any group of 10 people, at least 9 out of 10 of them would say, of course, I've lost friendships, relationships, family members, even from my life because of politics. And that's a very, very sad, divisive reality for us to acknowledge, that everything has become political in 2024, down to the brand of toothbrush that you used this morning, or if you're wearing Calvin Klein underwear, you're making a partisan political statement. And I think that's why our generation is so nostalgic for the 1990s. I write about this a lot when it comes to entertainment culture in the book, that we've brought back 1990s fashion. When we watch TV shows, we like to binge Friends and The Office and Seinfeld. And we kind of long for this time where people could just exist and be authentically themselves without constantly feeling like they're walking on eggshells and feeling like their best friend might walk out of their life the very next day. So I used to look at this as kind of a hopeless reality and bleak future for where we go forward, because it's become such a universal experience. And I certainly have experienced my fair share of people walking out of my life for posting silly videos on the internet talking about what's going on in culture, which is sad. But I've started to look at this through a more optimistic lens, because Generation Z is hungry for that time. We're nostalgic for a time that we don't even remember. And the friends that I have made being so outspoken, even if they do vehemently, fundamentally disagree with me, have started to bring respect, mutual respect, back into the fold for being authentic and honest about your values, to be what you see is what you get. And I'm hopeful that becomes the norm again.
Yeah, I think the word mutual is the key in that phrase, because even though you're different, you have a mutual respect and admiration for each other, even though certain positions are very dissimilar. You know, it's funny, I grew up in the 80s, so that was my decade, and that's been celebrated for years. But I think the culture is really starting to look back at the 90s. I am too, as gosh, that was actually a pretty darn good period. I think we undervalued it for a while because it didn't have the cool shoulder pads and all the 80s accoutrement that's so much fun to see on the screen. But it's more subtle, but it's more engaging. You know, I want to talk a little bit about short form content. You know, I've got two kids, two boys, and to get them to watch a movie with their dad is just brutal. There's often bribery involved, I'm not going to lie. And you talk about that in your book. Do you see Generation Z being kind of a twofer where, yes, you love the shorts and the YouTube and the reels and things like that, but you also will go to the theater? Or do you think that the movie experience, the theatrical model, could take a sizable hit when Gen Z as it comes of age?
Oh, this is fascinating. I'm going to come back to movies because I have a bit of different commentary on that. But I was asked in a different podcast interview recently if I'm concerned about the shrinking attention span of our generation because of short form content. And it's true. If you read the latest studies, they say Gen Z has the average attention span of about 7 seconds, which sadly, I believe. I find myself doom scrolling, as the teenagers like to say now, on Instagram and TikTok, and I will maybe lend about 20 seconds of my time to a video, even if I like it. And that's a huge eye-opening self-awareness opportunity for me. But I'm also noticing that in the constantly fast-paced, instant gratification, short-form content society we're building, there is a hunger for longer-form content. So in addition to all of the Instagram reels and TikTok videos I post every day, Monday through Friday, I host a 1 to 3 hour live stream where we talk about the biggest issues in culture, and people will watch the whole thing every single day. And those that do are typically younger. They're watching in college classes, which I don't condone, but I am appreciative of. They're watching at their first job or in the car or in their dorm room. And it's so cool to see people hungry for authentic long form conversation again, which a live stream can really facilitate, because I will ask the live chat, hey, what do you guys think about something like this? Or do you agree with what I just said? And we can go back and forth. And so I like that idea. And it's showing up in the entertainment industry as well. The shorts films that Disney used to put out, I think, are now being replaced by shorts that we're watching for commentary on social media. But even movies aren't the long form content anymore. Entire series are. And instead of sitting down to watch a 2-hour movie, you'll sit down to watch 10 episodes of the latest season of Stranger Things, which, by the way, I have no idea why that's taking so long. If Netflix can get on that, please, because we've all been waiting for way too long. But you'll watch TV for, 12 hours in a row to binge the entire season, and there's still hunger at the end of that. So as for movies, I've kind of been concerned that the golden era of movies has been an era gone by, which makes me sad because I love movies, particularly the classic great movies. But they've really been replaced in terms of budgets and creativity with these series that, interestingly, are longer form. You can fit more into the story that you're trying to tell. but spikes this interesting need in society for binging 12 hours of content instead of a 2.5 hour movie.
That's a great point about the shows. I didn't think about that. Sort of we have no patience for a movie, but we'll binge watch 3 episodes of Stranger Things and not blink an eye. And by the way, I also think that the rise of Joe Rogan with his 3 hour conversations is another good sign that we do crave something different and meatier than your typical content. I mean, we love the short stuff. We get that, but that is interesting. I real quickly want to talk about TikTok. You know, the book, your book has a very funny segment on what happens when TikTok is discussed on Capitol Hill and all heck breaks loose, and our poor senators and representatives don't know what the bleep they're talking about. But, you know, what I've been hearing lately is that maybe the best solution is to keep TikTok, but maybe have, I think ByteDance is the company that owns it with its CCP ties, to cut the cord there, to make some other company kind of take it over. But I don't know enough about the subject, but you're more intimately involved with TikTok. What are your thoughts there? What's a better solution? Because it does sound nefarious when you've got, you know, CCP, whatever's going on there. I mean, it seems like there's something nefarious there that I would love to address, but without the censorship of taking down a major platform.
Oh my gosh, so important. And I'm glad more people are starting to ask these questions, because for so long it's just been accepted to hear what your representative said for 3 minutes in a Senate hearing, and that's all you knew about the subject. You know, it's funny, as we are recording this right now, Congress is currently debating what to do about TikTok, and there's a big vote on it tomorrow morning on Capitol Hill. And I was speaking with an employee of TikTok yesterday about all of this, because I've been so outspoken about it on the platform, and they wanted some of my thoughts on where everything moves forward. But interestingly, a lot of the concerns that are being spouted from Capitol Hill really aren't based in reality. And I've done, probably a dozen live streams about this up to this point. We unfortunately don't have enough time to unpack all of it on the podcast today, so I encourage you to go check more of this out. But I'm fearful that the so-called concerns about data privacy and national security are really a Trojan horse on Capitol Hill to issue in further government censorship and authoritarianism. And the reason that I say that is because the bills that Congress is looking at, there are several in circulation, but the main one being the Restrict Act, doesn't say anything about TikTok as a platform. There's nothing about the company ByteDance. There's nothing about the CCP. Really, for the first time ever, they're being honest in the name of a bill by telling you exactly what they want to do. They want to restrict content on the internet, and these bills are very, very dangerous. They essentially allow unelected bureaucrats like the Secretary of Commerce to unilaterally regulate everything: hardware, software, every website, your online banking, online video games, anything that they deem to be a quote unquote threat to national security, which sounds fine at face value. But when you start looking at what the government is already labeling as threats to national security, like Catholic people going to mass on Sunday or moms testifying at school board meetings, I have a really hard time thinking that they're being honest about what a threat to national security actually constitutes. So just to assuage some of everybody's fears about all of this stuff, there has not been a single documented example, not one, and it's fascinating that this is allowed to be repeated, of the CCP accessing private Americans' data ever through TikTok. And yet there are countless documented examples of Meta, who owns Facebook and Instagram, selling your data to the CCP. There have been countless examples before Elon Musk purchased the platform of Twitter selling your private information and even messages to our own FBI for our government to spy on you. Heck, even Airbnb has been known to sell your data to the Chinese Communist Party. So this is a much larger issue than just one platform, which already runs all of its US data through servers in Texas rather than sending them all back to Singapore. But nobody in our government wants to talk about that. So when I really think about this critically, knowing that I already have a very strong distrust of most public institutions in America based on their track record in the last several years, I start to ask myself, well, why TikTok? Why is it this platform that everybody is so intent on going after from a bipartisan perspective, which already should strike you as odd, because our lawmakers can't agree on what to do about school curriculum, on what to do about funding foreign wars, about our southern border and national security. They can't even agree on what the definition of a woman is, but all of a sudden they want to band together and link arms to ban this platform. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's not an American company. all these American companies like Meta and X are already very closely intertwined with our government. They finance campaigns. They can go back and forth and have a government reach out and say, hey, I want you to censor every single post about this particular topic, which we know now has happened related to campaigns and COVID alike. And there's not this mutual back and forth in bed with each other relationship that exists with TikTok. And there's an authenticity. There's an honesty. There's a accessibility with TikTok that really doesn't exist with any other platform, where you can talk about what was happening at the State of the Union while you're sitting in the passenger seat of your car or putting your makeup on for the day. And I think that level of honest, open conversation is really threatening for people who want to control the narrative by all means necessary, down to censoring entire subjects, entire topics, and creators to make that happen.
Interesting. I think what you just shared is more complex and more insightful and more challenging than what you get from the media, which is why people are turning to live streamers like yourself and authors like yourself and voices like yourself instead of NBC News, which is basically a joke. Before I let you go, Isabel, you're in your 20s. I believe this is your second book. You're an influencer. You've got all these accomplishments at a very young age. What do you have bigger, larger goals professionally in your 30s and 40s? Are you thinking even that far ahead? Or I'm just kind of curious. Your career is so interesting, so unique, so be impossible, of course, 20 years ago, but here we are, and here you are. Mm-hmm. What do you, when you look ahead at your life and your professional life, what jumps out at you, or what are some things you like to kind of tackle?
Well, it's interesting. I never thought I would be doing something like this. The very short version is I was pre-med in college. I've always loved science because I've loved the pursuit of objective truth and doing all of the research that you possibly could to understand how the universe works, from the tiniest cell in your body to entire solar systems. And so when my life got thrown in a very different direction, I'm glossing over a whole lot of chapters in that story, but when I got thrown in a totally different direction, I thought, why did I study that? Why did I have such a passion for that as a child? And maybe it looks so different now. It really doesn't. And so I always like to tell people my job still is to get up every day and tell people the truth. That might not look like a white lab coat anymore, but whether it's a 15-second TikTok video or a 3-hour live stream or a book or a speech that I'm asked to give, that gets to be my job every day. And I'm incredibly fortunate that it has worked out this way, much anti to all of my plans that I had for my life. My parents ask me where do you see yourself in 5 years question, maybe more than everybody else, because bless their hearts, they're both attorneys in the corporate world, and their life is a little bit more structured and rigid than what I do every day, but they try so hard to understand what I do. And you just said it best yourself. This could never have happened 20 years ago. This couldn't have even have happened 5 years ago. I mean, TikTok as a platform didn't even exist to the same degree that it does a couple of years ago. So I think things move so quickly that I have no idea if this will transform into other books or different styles of commentary or radio or podcast or TV or whatever that looks like. Heck, I didn't even know I was going to do a live stream until about a year and a half ago full time. And now that gets to be my job every day. But I would like to think that in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years, I still have the privilege of getting up and telling people the truth for a job.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting, eclectic chapters to your career. That's my prediction, and I feel pretty comfortable with that. But Isabel, thank you for joining the show, and thanks for being a really great example of Gen Z and setting us straight on so many issues. Please grab her new book, The End of the Alphabet, How Gen Z Can Save America. It's out March 19th. I'm sure you'll find it on Amazon.com or your favorite bookseller. But before I let you go, I want to share the plugs myself, but you're in so many different places and different directions. What's the best way for people to find you on a day-to-day basis? Is there a specific home, a specific channel? How can we best steer listeners to you and what you do?
Like most screen-addicted screenagers of the Generation Z, I am across all of the social media platforms out there. You can find me at The Isabel Brown, and we go live every day during the week, Monday through Friday, at 3 p.m.-ish Eastern time on YouTube, on Rumble, on Instagram, on Facebook, across the entire internet. So one search will be pretty easy to find me.
Excellent. Embrace the ish, and all the best, and I hope we talk again.
Thank you so much for having me. At this point, you've probably either watched the Oscars or you've read a lot of postmortems about this show.
News travels fast. I know it's only a couple days ago, but that's the way our lives work these days. But there's one part of the show that is absolutely worth focusing in on. This is the second Oscar ceremony where politics didn't have a starring role. And more shockingly of all, Jimmy Kimmel, the host, again, kept his hard left views to himself, mostly. There were two exceptions. One was in the monologue, just a quip, not a great quip, by the way. The other one, well, I think we can blame a certain ex-president for making that possible. You know what I mean. But the stars, the people on stage, the people announcing the winners, the people who won the awards, pretty much didn't bloviate from the stage. There was no cancel culture screeds, nothing like that, nothing like we've seen in the past. It's pretty shocking, isn't it? I mean, this just in, breaking news. This might be a man bites dog story, but not really, not if you're paying attention. We've seen a lot of award shows lately that just kept the virtue signaling to a minimum. The Emmys, the Critics' Choice Awards, the Golden Globes, and now the Oscars. Again, like I said, 2 years in a row. That is an about face to what we've seen over the past few years. And you don't need me to describe what we've seen. It's been exhausting. Just lectures and virtue signaling and speeches and hypocrisy, atop hypocrisy. So this change, man, it's welcome. I love it. I think we're seeing something profound in the industry, something you don't often see in Hollywood. I think the industry is finally getting the message. We don't want to be lectured to by rich, hypocritical elites. No, we've had enough. We're not going to watch these shows until you figure that out and do something about it. Well, this year the Oscar ratings ticked up. Again, not a big amount, just a bit. But I don't think that's an accident. I just hope Hollywood officially got the message because we've been sending it for quite a while now. Oh, and before we wrap up, I want to get back to that Shaun of the Dead trivia question. Our slacker heroes crack open Shaun's record collection and start hurling the discs inside at the zombies. But not every record, by the way. Some are collector's items. You can't throw them. Others, let her rip.
Purple Rain. No. Sign of the Times. Definitely not. The Batman soundtrack. Throw it.
Well, that's it for the show this week. Thank you to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And while I have your attention, I hope you'll drop by HollywoodInToto.com. I update it 7 days a week with news, reviews, commentary, everything about what's going on in Hollywood. It is the right take on entertainment and woke-free since 2014. Yeah, it's our 10-year anniversary. See you next time.